Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell. Please leave a comment and visit our website at legendofthesuperstitionmountains.com. Let's get into this story. This is a story everyone's probably at least a little bit familiar with. You've probably heard the James Cravy story, and it's out there. People have talked about it. There's some videos about it. And you've probably heard that, right? James Cravy, he has some sort of information. He's going to find the Lost Dutchman Mine. He goes back in, a helicopter drops him off with supplies. Guy shows up a couple weeks later. The camp is undisturbed. They can't find him. They go back looking for him. They find some items thrown about along the trail. They finally give up, right? They can't find nothing to do with the guy. And then two guys are hiking along, and then they kind of look down and they find a rope across the trail, and they follow the rope, and there's a blanket with the rope tied around it. And they find the headless body of James Cravy. And then I believe part of it is also there's a camera with his initials on it, and they think this could be this guy. And then they come in, and then some distance away later, they find his head because he'd been beheaded. It's also reported that you could tell he had been shot at an upwards angle, and there was broken ribs and stuff, and there's things missing, and total complete mystery. That's the story we're told, and Barney Bernard told this story, and he was involved in the searches, and that's all fine and good. Let's start with James A. Cravy, which is usually what he's listed. He's said his name's actually James Henry Cravy. He was born in 1885 in a place called Goldthwaite, Texas. Cravy's a professional photographer, as is mentioned usually in the story. So they do get that correct, right? And Cravy bops around in Texas for a while. He ends up in San Angelo, Texas. He has a photography studio there. And he moves around and all a bit and ends up in Arizona, retired basically. Cravy's a little bit on the religious side. And so he has a dream one night, and he ends up having a vision. In this vision, he believes he's now found where the Lost Dutchman Mine is. But all his friends and everybody that knows him basically says, Jim, you shouldn't go out there. You've never been in the mountains. You're not an outdoors kind of guy. And this is just a bad idea because it's July. And Cravy's like, no, I got this all figured out. Well, they finally convince him at least not to hike in, because he's going to hike into the inner mountains. And he goes to hire a helicopter. He goes to the Arizona Helicopter Service to Edwin Montgomery, and he turns him on to a man named Marthin, who probably was more affordable. And Marthin agrees that he'll pilot him in and drop him and his supplies off at a camp. So they trailer the helicopter out to the Quarter Circle U, and that's where they take off. He takes Cravy out, drops Cravy off at his camp in LaBarge Canyon. And there Cravy waits while Marthin goes back. He gets all the supplies and then brings them back, helps unload them, set them up. And they cover everything with a tarp. And Marthin takes off, heads back to Quarter Circle U, trailers up his helicopter, and he's gone. And so James Cravy begins his journey into the superstitions. Well, his neighbors and friends finally get a hold of Sheriff Cal Boys because around July 2nd, because they're like, he was supposed to be out. Now, in the story that's generally told is he went in and the helicopter pilot came back, and most of the time they say it's Edwin Montgomery, which it wasn't. He came back 2 weeks later and found the camp undisturbed. Actually, it was after about a week or so, the neighbors started calling Cal Boys saying he wasn't back. He was supposed to be already back. I don't know how this was supposed to work, but they said he'd been out there longer than his time. They contacted Marthin. Marthin said, well, he had about an 8-day supply of food and water. So they realized there's concern. He's back there. It's summertime. It's 110 plus degrees. So they start to get ready to go out. The first group they send is a deputy sheriff with a National Guard airsman in a helicopter. And they go over, find the camp. The camp is undisturbed. Tarp's still over the supplies. They look over the camp. They start going around the surrounding area. They spend an entire day searching. They don't find a thing. No sign of Cravey. It doesn't even look like he's been in camp. So because of the heat and everything, the Pinal County Sheriff is just not interested in really going out there and searching, but he finally realizes Cravey could still be alive, so we have to go out and search for him. So they go out, they get to Cravey's camp, they find everything is undisturbed. All his supplies are there, his food and everything. It's to them almost like the helicopter pilot, Marthin, had dropped him off. Cravey had walked out to do something and never came back. So they find it completely mysterious now, realizing it's possibly been 3 weeks maybe since he's been missing. So they start sending the group out. They have some bloodhounds, and they start working in the heat. They actually spend something around 4 or 5 days in and out of the mountains searching. Even though some people make it sound like they just spent a day or two. They did spend a considerable time searching, and just similar to other times, they just had to call it off. It's too hot. One thing they did find is that they were coming down out of there. It was down a steep incline. They could tell the bloodhounds had picked up his scent, and it appeared he threw off some things he'd carried with him. One was a bedroll. Nobody knows why. The other was like an over-the-shoulder sack that had some food in it. And then finally, after a while, he threw away his canteen. Now, he appeared to be traveling south, southerly direction. They're figuring he was running for something or trying to lighten up, because the canteen was almost still full when they found it. So they find the full canteen. They're just like still mysterious, but they have to give up. Basically the dogs take them to almost a dead-end area, and the dogs mill about like they're confused, come back, pick up the trail again, go back to that spot, mill about like he just literally got up and vanished. So everybody's confused. Nobody knows what to think. They basically decide to wrap up the search and let's just go for home. There's a lot of concern about it, but it is until 1948 in February. The two gentlemen are out hiking, and they're out on a day hike on the southern end of the Superstitions, coming around up into LaBarge, up on the south side by Bluff Springs. And they're walking along, and they see a pair of jeans, like torn up jeans, out by the trail. And they pick them up, and they're looking at them, and they kind of find in them, oh, there's a wallet. So they open the wallet, and there was, they actually found change and something else personal. It had the name James Cravy in it, and it was $4.87. That's curious, isn't that guy? Is this a guy was missing in the newspapers? So they go over and they start to look around. They find some bones spread out in the area. They're kind of looking. They find a jacket. In the jacket's a billfold. The billfold has a $5 bill and an ID in it. They take the ID. They look around some more, find a hat, a couple other things. Don't really see anything else. Figure they'll get back, tell the sheriff. They get back, turn the ID into the sheriff, Cowboys again, Maricopa. He contacts the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, and Early comes out. Early again comes out to look at the remains. The remains are there, they're spread out. They look around for a while, and about 25, 50 feet away, in a bunch of hackberry bushes and stuff off to the way, they find the skull laying there. They pack up the remains are brought in, and that is pretty much the story of James H. Cravy, James Henry Cravy. Now, you probably go, well, there's a lot of mystery surrounding this story. And it isn't really, because for one problem is people forget to look at, James Cravy had a club foot. He also had an arm that was basically crippled. It was useless. He wasn't able to use his one arm. And he was in his 60s and retired. He was 5'4" and weighed around 200 pounds at this time. So he wasn't the picture of the person, an outdoorsman or someone known to be able to do this. So does this sound familiar? A gentleman that thought he knew where the Lost Dutchman is dropped off by some people in the middle of the mountains in the camp in the summertime. He's somewhat crippled. He's elderly. He's not in great shape. He wanders off from his camp and they find his remains. Oh, yeah, and supposedly he was shot, but there's nothing in the coroner's report about him being shot. Damn, if that doesn't sound like Adolph Ruth. So they find nothing wrong with anything given in this situation with Cravey. Now, Barney Bernard liked to tell a story or two, and I understand that. It's always good to tell a great story, embellish. But the story that most of us have heard or seen in print is so embellished with things. Now, perhaps when they gathered the body together, they put the bones in a blanket and wrapped it up with some rope. That makes sense, actually. And his hat and jacket and so forth were said to have been under a rock. It could have been they picked up the jacket and a couple things, the clothing and the hat, and they put a rock on it to keep it from blowing away while they were gathering everything else. So it could be some truth, but it was things that happened after the fact in the given situation. But it is funny how it all parallels Adolph Ruth, except that we look at the death certificate, which says he died from exposure from having no food, no shelter, and no water. So it pretty much explains what happened to Cravey. Cravey went out, wrong time of the year, had very little experience. He was not the picture of health. He probably had no business. And in my thoughts, generally, is he was brought to the camp. He realized maybe he bit off more than he could chew. He was hoping if he traveled south towards where the helicopter went, it was 4 miles from his camp to the Quarter Circle U. He might have been actually trying to head back out to get out of the mountains after he'd been placed in the mountains, because that seems to be somewhat the direction he's following. Don't listen to where they say he was camped where Adolph Ruth was and things like that. He wasn't. Adolph Ruth was camped in a entirely different area. Adolph Ruth's remains were found in Needle Canyon and on a washout offset. Cravey's down in LaBarge, and Cravey's found more towards between Bluff Springs and Whiskey Springs in that general vicinity. So he was probably most likely trying to get out of the mountains when he died. And why he threw his canteen and stuff aside, no one knows. But I think they would have understood why he died. Now, how did all this happen and how the mystery happened? I don't really know why James H. Henry Cravey becomes James A. Cravey. The best I can know is the people that knew him didn't know him well. When I went to look up, if you look for James A. Cravey in the story, it's hard to find the death certificate, much less anything else possible on him. And I was like, that's kind of funny because he's a photographer, and a photographer should be somewhere. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, he had an arm that was not working, and he had a club foot. So anybody named Cravey, you're going to find a draft record that's going to show something akin to this. So I just went to the World War II draft records for anybody named Cravey, and lo and behold, James Henry Cravey pops up out of Texas. He had broken his arm in 5 places and had a crushed elbow. And I'm like, this is very interesting. So I take that individual and look what he was doing in census records in Texas and Arizona, and lo and behold, he's a photographer. The shame is a lot of times people don't take time, even when writing a book or doing anything or telling the story, of looking into something a little. And with me, I prefer to kind of look at it a little deeper, kind of try to get an understanding. There was no background on the Lost Dutchman. I don't know what he really knew about it other than he had a dream. He had a vision that he knew where the Lost Dutchman is. He's probably an older retiree. It's after World War II. He probably just had this feeling and believed really something had come to him and he knew where it was. Unfortunately, it led to his demise. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that's something that sticks with a lot of people. Sometimes you can be the dreamer, but you have to understand the capacity, the endurance and stamina it takes to be back in the mountains, especially in July when it's 110 degrees. So there we go. We've kind of resolved a lot of that. The story of James Henry Cravey. And I hope everybody enjoyed that. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week. And you have to remember the most important thing here. I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this is Chasing Legends.